Yeah, come forward if you want, make yourself comfortable. But yeah, thank you all for being here. Welcome to the Poetry Project. My name is Mira Narsanios. I am the program director, and this is my first in-person event. And what an honor for this first in-person event to be hosting nourbeSe, Philip, and Tonya Foster. Yes, please. For the celebration of the 15-year anniversary of Zong, which is, I think, a book that changed everything for many of us. So thank you so much, nourbeSe, for this beautiful contribution. We also have some copies of the book available here, so please grab a copy. It's a new edition by Graywolf Press, and it's beautiful. It has two beautiful introductory essays, one by Setaey Adamu and Catherine McKintrick, and also a long introduction by nourbeSe that contextualizes the work as well, which is really deep and meaningful. So before we begin, I wanted to share a few of our upcoming events. There's a lot going on in the Poetry Project, and I hope you can join us for what's next. So on Friday, September 27, Daniel Borsuski and Vincent Toro will be reading. On Sunday, Energies, it's a reactivation of Gordon Matta Clark's Rose Bush at St. Mark's Church. So it's going to be an event with readings and performances, and it's free, so I welcome you to join us for that one as well. And October, we have Dennis Cooper and Derek McCormack. So that's going to be big. It's going to be in the sanctuary. And on the next day, on Thursday, October 3rd, we're hosting the Palestinian novelist Ibrahim Nasrallah, who will be in conversation with Huda Fakhreddin. And they're just in town for a very short period, so catch them if you can. And on, and I think I'm going to stop here for upcoming events, but I really hope you can join us. What else? Yes, housekeeping. Oh yeah, we have an amazing new newsletter. So you have it, you should all have a copy. Each seat has a copy, and feel free to grab one as well at the door. And yes, bathrooms, important. We have two all gender bathrooms, one on the first floor and another one on the ground floor. If you need to get there, let me or anyone else on staff, Will and Nicole are here, and we will get you there. Okay, I think that's it for announcements. I will now read the bios of our two guests and then introduce nourbeSe and then leave her the floor. So nourbeSe Philip is a renowned poet, essayist, and playwright, and practiced law for 7 years before becoming a writer. She received the 2020 PEN Nabokov Award for Achievement in International Literature. Born in Tobago, she lives in Toronto. Welcome, nourbeSe. And this is the new edition of Zong. The authors have kindly agreed to sign copies, so go find them after the reading. And our second guest is Tonya M. Foster, is the author of A Swarm of Bees in High Court, also a really beautiful book here that is available. So please grab a copy. She's the author of A Swarm of Bees in High Court, the bilingual chapbook La Grammaire des Eaux, and a co-editor of Third Mind, Teaching Creative Writing Through Visual Art. Forthcoming publications include Thingifications, a Mathematic of Chaos, a 10th anniversary edition of A Swarm of Bees in High Court, Umbra Galaxy, a 2-volume compendium of the Umbra Writers' Workshop, and an anthology of experimental creative drafts, So a lot to look forward to. The 2023 recipient of the Foundation for Contemporary Arts. No? Okay. I was asked not to read this, so I won't. And that's, should I end here? Okay. Welcome, Tonya. Okay. Okay, and I will now introduce nourbeSe if I find my text. Here it is. Okay. There is a before and an after Zong, a book that altered the course of contemporary poetics and whose immeasurable contribution, there are simply no parameters to measure it, continues to challenge with each reading the book form itself, the way reading works as an individual act predicated on an object which, in this case, doesn't consent to being a single thing. I'm well aware that this is a book launch, and a beautiful one at that, yet the story of the Zong exceeds the sum of its pages, predates the time of publication. A Life or Sentiency, its author, M. nourbeSe Philip, channels in a call to redress the murder of 150 enslaved African thrown overboard a British ship on November 29, 1781, and left to drown in the Atlantic Ocean so that its captain, Luke Collingwood, could claim insurance monies for the financial loss incurred by the forfeiture of his cargo. The tragedy might have never reached us had it not been documented in a court of law, the same law that enabled the massacre of the very lives whose records it preserves, turning the conditions of possibility of the story of Zong into the conditions of its impossibility. A tale that must be told, yet can't be told in nourbeSe's words. Archives bury facts, and we all know that facts don't speak for themselves. They need poets to rescue them from the steady stream of historical oblivion, or more predictably, deliberate erasure. In Zong, nourbeSe appends the court of law by creating an inverted stage, a stage where 150 lives murdered by an entire worldview, its economic and legal systems can step forth where we, the living, step back, heeding to what might at first be mistaken for silence, but is in fact the hum of a new language nourbeSe wrestles back from centuries of syntactic violence. If the language of the law is endowed with performative powers, then to counter this power, poetry must conjure another kind of sociality, one in which the interdependence between the living and the dead organizes the foundations of this life and of others. Zong creates a language for an otherworldly commons in an English that abuses the grammar of property, the additive logic of lack, whereby having more always implies being reduced to less, life, water, air. To mourn those it has murdered, English must become illegal, illogical, illegible, divested from sense-making, an anti-meaning, as nourbeSe writes, where words dislodged from their institutional history populate the page like haunted shells, stubborn historical detritus, particles of meaning embedded within a particular sound or voice. J'ai faim, sal, sum, seva, Torah, sal, am, are some of the words overheard on the Zong that nourbeSe's poem, by impairing the discourse that originally silenced them, have made audible anew. A forensic of the sob, sonic evidence passing through time, ushering us back to the scene of the murder as it can be witnessed, not only in the past tense, but in the present one too. Without denying the specificity of this particular tragedy, it is safe to say that the same forces that have led to the massacre of the Zong are still in 2024 alive and thriving, cloaked under democratic values so as to better serve capital's enterprise of decimation and extraction. The same genocidal logic denying the value of certain lives by granting words to others is at work every time a Black person is murdered by the police in this country or left to rot in an overpopulated prison, that migrants crossing the Mediterranean in search of a future drown before Europe's apathetic gaze. and the repeated massacres Palestinians have and continue to endure at the hands of Israel's genocidal army, while the Western world talks of security and the right to exist. It's been 15 years since Zong was published that nourbeSe has been gathering us in polyvocal readings, acts of remembrance that aren't isolated or divorced from the current terms of our life. We're tremendously grateful for her commitment to the work of translation, summoning, convening, for writing poems in which each word acts as evidence not only of what was, but what is yet to come. Please join me in welcoming nourbeSe Philip to the stage.
Nombre, falope, bisuga, nuru, chimwala, sala, nombre. Yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya. Yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya, nombre. Yamaya olokun, falope. Olokun yamaya, bisuga. Yamaya olokun, nuru. Yamaya olokun, chimwala. Yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya. Yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya. Yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya. Yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya. Zong number 11. Suppose the law is not, does not, would not, be not. Suppose the law not a crime. Suppose the law a loss. Suppose the law. Suppose nombre. Suppose falope. Suppose bisuga. Suppose nuru. Suppose chimwala. Zong number 15. Defend the dead. Weight of circumstance, ground to usual, and etc. Where the ratio of just in less than is necessary to murder. The subject in property, the save in underwriter, where etc. tunes justice, and the ratio of murder is the usual in occurred. Yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya, yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya. Akila, falope, ouma, weke, jubade. the just in ration, the suffer in loss, defend the dead, the weight in circumstance, acte in necessary, the ration in just, age the act in the our way to justice. Yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya, yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya. Masire, ndale, omowunmi, ramla, ajani. Should they have? Should they have? Should they have? Should they have found being sufficient? A necessity? Portion that question. Should they have found the justify for exist? A rule for new? The policy within the laws? Portion that question, etc. Should they? Might they have found Nampumolelo? Might they have found Okulaja? Might they have found Ekisola? Might they have found Abike, Arike? The off and during and wherefore, the preserving, the insurance of water, the within loss, the terms of exist, a Negro of wit. Should they have found water and being sufficient? Tulolope, Suma, Okunola, Kalife, Siad. Zong number 25. Justify the could, the captain and the crew, the authorizing captain, crew, and could. Could authorize, justify captain and crew? The could. Or justify, authorize, could, captain and crew? Authorize, Bomani, authorize Yaya, authorize Madupe, authorize Jabo, Fayola, Bisuga, Yamaya Olokun, Olokun Yamaya, Yamaya Olokun, Olokun Yamaya. The crew, the captain, and the could. The justify in captain, Yamaya Olokun. The justify in captain, could, and crew, in authorize, Justify the could, the captain and the crew. Justify the authorize, the could. Mologo, Tiwalade, Unifada, Solanke, Wamakuta, Nsomba. Yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya, yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya, yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya. Yamaya olokun, olokun yamaya. Am is, no more is water, is word was, a den, a lair of liars on the ship that set sail where from. You ask Africa, I say how inside the wind, clams feed on weeds, weeds feed. Our body is, we wend our way can. You not hear the noise? Ruth, band of Negroes run to and fro, ship sail, how many men on board, ship sail, how many Negroes overboard, her scent on my fingers, my hand, the scent of Africa is with me ever, my skin, lips, your scent, in the roses of war, of roses, Ruth, my mind only. The roses of war do not last grow. Them ashe, then sere we feed the sea ashe. With them ashe, oh. Feed the seas with them. A frenzy of ashe, bodies, limbs, fins round and round ashe. My God and my Eden, fish sip. Fish sup, fish sip and sup on the ore of glory. Who can save me? Ruth, how can sane men, when truth is worn thin, my word, is my truth now drab, faded of no worth? We must, I shed my skin as does the asp. Am no more who I was or am, sans skin raw without the sin of kin in this age of gin and rum and guns, this age of los negros, les negres. Ignore the age, the rage of sane men, just us, Ruth, just us, yus. These are sad days over me. Un ange noir, Niger from the Niger, with wings, do I exist, is it? I am X, I am X, I am X. Man of the sea is now a body, why? Pond and she, the one eye, the one I desire who arouses me. An agent of Satan, of lust is no more. I exit la mer, everywhere, Mari. These are sad days. How many the ship appears a pig sty of sacks of corn and grain. Days. Troyed water gone, did we care to spare them? Their fate, us, ours, fall. They grow wings, des I, las alas. They grow wings, les I, las alas. They grow wings, 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 les isles, las alas, yamaya olokun, they grow wings, olokun yamaya, las alas. Yamaya olokun, they grow wings. Olokun yamaya, they grow wings. Yamaya olokun, they grow wings. Olokun yamaya, they grow wings. Yamaya olokun, they grow wings. Olokun yamaya. Thank you.
Thank you, nourbeSe. What a gift. Thank you so much. We're gonna change the setting here and install 2 chairs, 2 mics, so that Tonya and nourbeSe can begin a conversation. So it will take 2 minutes, 2-3 minutes to, don't go away, stay here. Yeah, it will be quick. Water, yes. Do you need an extra chair, Tonya, to put your...
I can take that mic.
Okay.
That's going to be the Q&A mic.
Oh, that's the Q&A mic.
Perfect.
You know, I want to say hello, hello, hello. Good evening. You know, I'd like to start, I just kind of, honestly, I need a minute after that reading. And I need a minute for a lot of reasons. One, it's sort of printed as the 15th anniversary of the publication of Zong. And, you know, when Maureen talks about it changing things, it's actually my friendship with nourbeSe that changed things for me. Just in terms of, and I marked the sort of 15 years because I was sent this book in manuscript. And I remember thinking, what the actual hell? And I thought, okay, what is my brain supposed to do with this? And the friendship changed things for me because there was really an understanding and an emphasis on the notion that poetry matters. That some of us write for kicks, and some of us, it's a life or death matter, even if we're laughing, right? And so I wanted to start with a poem by someone else, in part because nourbeSe and I have talked about some about citational practice, right? And that citational practice may actually be a way not only of writing yourself into the record as is, but it actually is a way of building community and a way of inviting others into community and into conversation. And nourbeSe has, for me, always been the person who understood that the dudes on the corner are theorizing the conditions of their own lives, as well as Foucault, as well as Gregson. And so this poem is called At Last Another's Heartbeat. It's by Marcellus Williams, who was put to death yesterday by the state of Missouri. The silhouettes of their bond visible still at the last glow of the sun, they experience each other and the life of the night as it begins to stir, standing there in silence, holding hands. No rush to go back inside. There is so much beauty and comfort in being in love and just being. Amidst sounds of buzzing, chirps, crickets, the pleasant but irregular blowing of the wind. Fireflies dancing in step with the light of the moon. How strange it is to become aware of another's heartbeat, but forget one's own. Finally, love. So the notes from yesterday, the state of Missouri put Marcellus Williams to death despite no evidence of his guilt or culpability. Defend the dead, ground to usual, and etc. Incarcerated for 24 years, he was murdered by the state. The governor adjudicated his death more necessary than his life. His being was to be ground to usual, and etc. Authorized, could, justified the could, the justify in governor, justify the authorize. So I wanted to draw on that language. One, the obvious point that there are many ways that that kind of state justification of violence and of negation, attempts at negation, continues. And so how do we talk about poetry in light of that? nourbeSe and I have sort of more than 17 years of long, winding conversations that for me reconfigured my thinking about what's possible and why the hell I'm doing what I'm doing. And forgive me for cussing. Mom, if you're watching, sorry. This is from the fantastic essay, nourbeSe's essay, in the beginning of Zong. Regarding Zong, My concern with structure goes beyond the formal demands of poetry and is imbricated in the history of empire and colonialism, with which the three works, and by three works she means Looking for Livingston, Zong, and She Tries Her Tongue. Form is of great importance and significance to me as a poet, and Zong is a work of great formal strength, a quality that was and is necessary to meet the powerful centrifugal, Césaire refers to it as volcanic, force of the transatlantic trade in Africans. I would include the Arab trade as well. In other words, the formal strength and rigor of the text are necessary to meet the ferocity and the cataclysm that was and continues to be the Mafa. You can't meet what that experience meant and survive it without having inner social structures to meet it, without having a rigor and a formal strength. Hence my insistence on the necessity to attend to the structural underpinnings of the text, which carry the weight of memory and of history, as well as the unassuaged, ongoing loss. And you should get the book, read the rest of the essay. The last phrase that I'd like to read, and then, generally ask your thoughts, nourbeSe, is where you write that we have been encouraged to believe that the law and consequent monetary compensation is the most, if not the only, effective way of repairing historical damage. But what if that damage were beyond repair? By the law? What then of extra legal forms of repair and reparations which exceed the law and cannot be caught by it? That perhaps is the domain of the artist, the storytellers, griots, the musicians and poets, those who have been called an answer, the need for repair of the spirit and of being. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. Hi, welcome everyone. I can only do this without tears by welcoming you into my kitchen, which is where I have a lot of conversations, or pretend you're overhearing me and Tanya talking on the phone. I just have to explain a few things. Usually I perform in white. This is the first time I've ever performed in cloth, as it's called on the continent. Jessica was there yesterday at NYU and saw me perform. It becomes difficult because usually I do a performance of Zong and it's extended, but with these hybrid forms, so to speak, where I am supposed to read and perform and then do a conversation, it's always a problem as to what to do. And so today I did bring my white things, and I thought, do I do it or not? And then I thought on the way here, when I went to Ghana to ask permission to bring these voices forward, we went with the scholar. He used to teach here at one point, Kofi Anyedoho, Professor Kofi Anyedoho, and he took me to his home area of the Ewe people in Ghana. The Ewe people are the poets in Ghana, apparently, whereas the Ashanti are the lawyers and doctors and so on. Every society has it, yes. So we got there, my friend and I, we were doing this course at the University of Legon, Ghana, University of Ghana, Legon, and we were told we had to wear cloth. And cloth is African fabric, and so some women came and wrapped us in the fabric So today, as I was coming down and wondering, oh my God, should I wear white, but it's not ironed, and all those kinds of things, I thought, oh, but you're wearing cloth, nourbeSe, so maybe it'll work. So I just want to sort of share some of those things with you because it's all part of the whole thing. And I just want to say hello to, I see Chris and Jessica from my term last year at Princeton, and Omar from our time in Morocco. And we're on the same level, so I can't see everyone, but I'm just so moved to be here and to share this with you all. And forgive me if I haven't seen everybody. And of course, my dear friend Tonya, we go back, and I want to mention Erica and her husband Marty, who's a jazz musician. Actually, I read Zong. The first time I performed Zong to music was with Marty. What was the name? The Bowery Poetry Club. So it's really lovely. And I also
that was
want
a
to
killer series. I said that was a killer series.
Yeah.
You read with Julie Patton.
Yeah.
Who else read? Kamal Brathwaite read in that series.
Thank you. And I also want to, if I may have a chance to read it here, but to thank, we're in a time where we understand we live in empire, yes? And the US, is rightly criticized. But I just want to say that I owe a lot to poets here in the US. I'm looking at Charles over there, one of the first people, if not the first person. No, I think maybe Chris Miller may have invited me before, but around the same time. I remember crossing the border at Buffalo and being really nervous and so on, because I wrote a lot of essays and criticized racism in Canada. And the Canadians are very subtle, but it can be quite powerful. And I got no work in Canada for quite a while. And were it not for American poets like Charles and scholars like Chris Miller and Sue Houchins, who recently passed away, and so on, who would invite me, and Nate Mackey. It's because of that I'm sitting here today, because I thought, well, there must be something of value, because there's some poets somewhere who are asking me. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of those poets and people. And yeah, so there is some good to be found in empire. And the poets are bringing it home. Yes, thank you very much. Also, it's not an apology, but an explanation. Usually I have a lav mic so I can move more, and it was a little bit challenging holding the mic and trying to turn the pages and so on. So just an explanation. But justify the authorized. What you read from, and I was saying this to Omar, was actually a quotation from a letter I wrote to the publishers in Italy who mistranslated Zong. And the reason why we have this 15th anniversary is because, as well, the publishers, Wesleyan, whom I was really happy with, and we parted company very pleasantly, but I got the rights back because I kept telling them that they had misconstrued the way the words are supposed to appear on the page, and they just wouldn't listen to me, and they did go ahead and publish it. Some of you know, I see you nodding your heads, I called for the book to be destroyed. But because of that, I got the rights back and found other publishers, one of whom is Graywolf, and Kaylin is here from Graywolf, thank you. And I just want to shout out Chance Erlin, who has left Graywolf, but Chance just kept gently pursuing me because I wasn't sure I wanted to publish with Graywolf. And yeah, so I'm really grateful. And it's also published in the US and in England.
When if we're going to go there, I think you've been very gentle in describing, at the end, things ended well, but that it was remarkably painful, speaking to what went down, and speaking to the mistranslation and being ignored. And I wanted to press this because there's a spate of firings of black women in positions recently. There's a way of not hearing black women when they speak. There's a way of stealing from black women and not citing them. And so, as gentle as you're being in describing it, I was witness to the pain it caused. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So most of you who know the work know the rationale behind the organization, which was that, and it's in the Notanda in the first edition, each fragment or word or phrase has to be rising into the space above it in the line immediately above. And that's the one rule in the 4 books after Oz. And that was intended deliberately to represent the words and our words as we read it. We breathe for them who could not breathe at that time. And to mess with that is to destroy the fundamental underpinnings of the work. I was told that it was Italian, therefore they couldn't break it at certain places and so on. I didn't know they were doing the translation until I got the proofs and other things like that. So I think it's wonderful, though, that we now have this 15th anniversary, because that wouldn't have happened had I remained.
And I wasn't trying to sort of distract from that.
No,
I think it's amazing. I also think it's significant that it's not as though this wonderful thing didn't come out of pain.
Yeah, it came out of a lot of, I remember really begging them and pleading them. But, you know, it's fascinating because if you have your edition, on one of the pages, there is not a drawing, but an image of the text with lines drawn. And I actually used that to send to them, to show them why it was so important that the text be in a certain way, because if you have words coming under each other, you can't draw that net. And what it reminded me of was the poetics of relation, an actual physical representation that everything is in relation to something, to another word or phrase, yes? So I learned a lot from that experience, but I want to get to your question about related to the poem by Marcellus, because what I say in the last paragraph, no, not the last paragraph, the third, I think, paragraph from the Notanda, I'll just read it to you. The descendants of that experience appear creatures of the word, apparently brought into ontological being by fiat and by law. The law it was that said we were or were not. The fundamental resistance to this, whether or not it was being manifested in the many, many instances of insurrection, was the belief and knowledge that we, the creatures of fiat and law, always knew we existed outside of the law, that law, and that our being was prior in time to fiat, law, and word, which converted us to property, pig, port, field, wood, bull, Negro. It is a painful irony that today so many of us continue to live, albeit in an entirely different way, either outside of the law or literally imprisoned within it, unable to not tell the story that must be told. And I think it's really important. You know, I was saying recently to someone that, and I've thought this for a long time, that while I really think celebrating emancipation and so on, I understand it, but I have felt that, what are we celebrating? We're celebrating the European coming to an understanding. finalement, finally, that we all knew, that you cannot make of a human being a thing. That's what I mean about, there's another kind of freedom that we're talking about, and that if we can hold that close, the issues of reparations, which need to be monetary, but to remember that that's not the end all and be all. Because if we think that, then that's the end. That there's some forms of repair that only we can give ourselves and each other. We need to give it to ourselves. And that's where this idea, when I talked about spirit and intellect in terms of poetry, came up yesterday. So I think it's really important for us to keep some of those things in mind as the push for reparations comes up. And also that I believe deeply that there's no amount of money that can actually compensate for what happened to us. And while it can't be repaired, I think we can heal ourselves. And I have sometimes thought, I want to tell the Palestinians, just believe, just believe. And they do. I mean, I've been humbled by scenes I've seen online. But if we have survived that cataclysm, and have memory and continue to work, I think the impossible is possible, even as we face down what it is we're looking at today. I really do. I really do. We have to. There's a writer, some of you may know, I introduced her to the class last year, Colin Diane, who, she has a book called The Law is a White Dog. And she really digs deep into how the laws in the US, you know, strip us of essential humanity and humanities. One of the things she pointed out, and I have to confess I didn't know, was that we were things until we committed a crime, or were deemed to commit a crime. So we only achieve personhood in a criminal context. And that legacy is still with us.
Well, sure,
it's evil.
corporations have no culpability.
Absolutely.
Right? So they can commit crimes and not be held responsible. And yet they're also deemed persons. So it's this weird thing that our sort of thingification, that our humanness was only detectable in the moment of crime. It's actually the opposite for corporations in the US. Yes. That's it.
Wow.
Now we are going to turn it for questions. I generally, there was a timer, so I try to stop. But there are many other questions I have about citations and other things.
Let me say one thing, because I've been thinking about this idea of citation, and you know, all of you know the essay by Sarah Ahmed, and there's a quote at the end which I think is really relevant here. If we are to learn how not to reproduce what we inherited. And I think that is the collective work that we're doing. How to not reproduce. I'd like to put it in a more positive way, but how to ensure maybe that we don't reproduce that which we inherited, or how to mess with what we inherited. Do you know? I come from an age, I'm very old, and I come from a time when you had to read text, take what you wanted from it, and throw out the rest. I call it scavenger scholarship. Seriously. No, because just think, 47, 52, what are you reading about who we are? And so it builds a kind of muscle, you know, a bullshit detector, even without being trained. Okay, that I can use, that I don't have to use. I mean, and that to me is a kind of guerrilla scholarship that I think we still have to employ. Yeah?
Oh, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's the kind of living we have to employ. And that when I think about citation, I actually don't mean just quote those folks in the book. That quote, I don't want to go to the grandmother. Everybody goes to grandma. But like, well, some people don't like their grandmas. But, you know, talk to so many people, tell you, have something to tell you about how to live, how to survive what we're not meant to survive. And I am talking about survival here. I know it sounds dramatic, but Marcellus was just put to death for a crime he did not commit. That we can, and as if the crime were reason to take out somebody. So when I think about citational practice, I'm thinking about interdisciplinarity. I'm thinking about different registers of language. I'm thinking about different spaces we exist in. And that like that you are writing here about spirit, so often, and I'm gonna stop talking, actually, because I'm thinking so often we act as though the objective were a real point of view that were not created, as if it were as if it were somehow natural. We create the objective point of view in the same way that the subjective point of view is an invention of language. So, anyway, questions from you lovely people? Yes.
Maybe I'll stand so you can see me. Hello, and thank you both for the conversation. Thank you, nourbeSe, for the reading. I was just wondering, I read an article recently, and I was wondering if you had come across it, nourbeSe. And I'm thinking about it in relation to a word that comes up in Notanda, which is exaqua, this word where you mention attending a lecture by somebody who worked on the genocides in Bosnia and Rwanda, and the necessity for families of survivors to exhume the bodies and find the bones. And you wonder what can be done with the liquid graves. Where are the bones in the Atlantic? And the article I read was about these black archaeologists. Of course, it's being a colonial profession. It doesn't have a lot of black people in it, or at least didn't. But there are black archaeologists now, and there is this project that is led by the Natural Museum of African American History, where they dive in the Atlantic to find remains of the ancestors. It's called the Slave Remains Project. And I was wondering if you had come across it, and if you can say something about that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm sure some of you may have seen the film. Samuel L. helped to produce it. There's a film on Netflix in which I think it's about 7 parts, and he's actually with some of these divers as they start off. Well, it starts out with him being welcomed into a tribe in Africa that he has some connection with, and then it starts off in England, and they're black divers, and they've been going around to different, so there's one in South America, one off the east coast of Africa. It's actually quite wonderful and very much worth seeing, yeah. There was one that was set, well, there was a dive, but they featured that wonderful musician, what's her name? She plays banjo, Rhiannon, yeah, Rhiannon, yeah. So she was in that particular one. Yes, Omar, thank you for that. So I really recommend that. It's really worth seeing. And I know that they're a group of, I'm not sure, so I won't say who they are, but they were trying to get a certain section of the Atlantic declared prohibited to mining for oil and so on because of those who died there. You can look that up too. I'm sorry, I don't have much more detail about it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's one.
Hi, thank you so much for this reading and everything. I was really interested, well, in a lot, but in the performance aspect and in like the choreography and the movement that you incorporated. And yeah, I was just curious if you could talk more about like the devising process of that.
Okay, so I should confess something. my desire, if in terms of performance, if you know, I wanted to be a spy, but no, seriously. Because again, I was reading all this stuff after World War I, and being a spy made so much more sense because writing was just not a possibility. But then, you know, calypso, I come from Trinidad, and a backup singer is perfect, you know, because you're on stage, yes, but you're not center. And every so often you step forward and say, "Ooh, ooh." That's perfect for me. Or by way of saying that, I die many deaths when I do this. But I also love dance, so I've been taking dance classes for years and years. So I like stuff, you know, I like movement and so on. And so that helps me. And what I've said in the preface is that I don't perform it, I allow it to perform me. And I also talk about, I don't know what it is I'm doing. You know, Erica, you're from the Caribbean, you know what obia means, right? And obia is like what you have in the southern states here, I believe. So it's a not residue, it's a continuation of certain practices, African practices that have been demonized. I suspect it's probably still made illegal on the books. And so I ask myself sometimes, like, what am I doing? Obia, you know, you're not supposed to mess with that if you're middle class or aspiring middle class, as my family was. So I've asked myself many times, like, what am I doing? And you know, I recently have been thinking about this idea, you know, the sacred sciences in Africa. And yesterday I talked, even that refrain I was singing, Yemaya Olokun, it's a piece of music that I listen to a lot. And Olokun is the deity, many of you know who Yemaya is there, or Yemaya, the deity of the surface waters. And in Brazil, in February, is it, Maria Luisa? Yeah, there's a wonderful ceremony in Bahia where they send the boats out into the ocean. Olokun is the goddess of the well, deity, let's say, of the bottom of the ocean. And Olokun can be either male or female or both. And Olokun, the deity, represents riches and success and so on. And of course, you have different chants for Olokun. This one combines, because it's all water. And that was what I was reading today, Charles, in the book you gave me yesterday about everything is flow. Do you remember? Everything is fluid. Yeah, I thought, oh, this is really fascinating. So I don't know. I mean, like, I'm just trying to honor these people. And every time I do it, I think of it as offering something to them, and something to myself, and something to you. And as I say, I'm not a trained performer in that sense, but I'm always trying to keep fit. As I get older, I can't go down as easily and get up as easily. So I have to be careful I don't fall. So I've performed it like here, solo. Usually when I do these performances, I have a bell and a string of beads, seeds. I sent it back to Canada after I was in New Haven last week. And yesterday when I arrived at NYU, there was a bell there. And I thought, oh, they're telling me I need to use a bell. There was no bell here today. And so I thought, well, I'll just use my voice, which I don't feel I am, again, I'm not a singer. So I've performed. We had a group called the Zong Quartet, where we performed around Toronto, which was myself, upright bass player, someone who played on the keyboard, and a percussionist. I've performed, and then recently, I've always been interested in techno. I really think, Jeff Mills, anybody knows Jeff Mills? Yeah. I went to a Jeff Mills concert once and then suddenly understood what raves were all about. And it's my fantasy to have Jeff Mills play and I do Zong. So if any of you can arrange that, please. But there's a professor in Toronto, Maria Louisa knows him, Mark Campbell. He runs something at U of T called the Afrosonic Lab. Maria Louisa was on a residency there recently where I met her. She came out to this, what I'm telling you about, which was Zong to techno beats. And it was awesome. It was fucking awesome, let me tell you. Seriously. So for instance, what it did, this was amazing, it opened up the entire book. So I never read from the essay. I was reading the essay and the beat was just driving it forward. It was simply remarkable. Yeah, so just by way of answering, but it's always difficult, always. What, the techno beat? Mm-hmm. 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 Absolutely. And of course I should say it's in... I'm a spy. Well, I think all writers are spies in some... Yes. No, I mean in the spy in the sense of, you know, you're always observing, you're looking, you're paying attention to what somebody does, how they sit, those who do fiction. Yeah, but I think all writers are spies. But I do want to say... I do want to say it's in the footnote that I always shout out Fred Moulton, who was the one who I was trying to figure out how to read this book. The same thing happened with She Tries Her Tongue. I didn't know how to read the second half of the book that had all these many voices. And then a student asked me one day to read Universal Grammar, and I said to her, I will if you read it with me. It was like the light bulb went off. Okay, that's what it's about. I don't know if this has happened to other writers. You do stuff and then you continue to learn from it. Yeah. And so I didn't know how to read this book, and then I met a woman at Cooper Union, and she said, have you heard what Fred did? I said, no. And she said he was teaching a class, and in the break he said to the class, put down your coffee cups, pick up Zong, and start reading. And as soon as I heard that, I thought, oh yeah, that's what I have to do. I have to get a collective reading of it. So I just think in terms of citation, it says mentioned in the footnotes, but yeah. It's all part of the performance, yeah. Yeah, and the collectivity. Yeah.
You mentioned that sometimes the work is performed through you, right? That the work comes through you. That's also how you list who the author is. That it's as told to you by, as though you are receiving this in some sense. And that's all. I just wanted to say that. And so that the performance, I see the... I hope you guys have seen the Frankie Beverly second line in New Orleans, largest second line in the world. Frankie Beverly and Mays, everybody's in white, and there is this ritual of like saying, okay, we are here for it, and something about him and that music is coursing through all these bodies, right? And so I think of Zong, even in that, especially in that sort of collective, that invitation for all of us, that it's not a collective invitation to perform something for entertainment, but it's actually an invitation to allow something to enter us. And I don't know, like I've been thinking about, I mean, we've gone back and forth about the way that it is necessary to break the language to get at what is the story that can be told. Because the grammatical structures as they are have no space for it, have no articulation, and that we can't even know. And so it's not a performance, but an experience.
That's correct, yeah. And as you were talking, I was remembering when we were at Naropa many, many years ago, and Trayvon was shot, and we did a reading of Zong, a collective reading of Zong. It's online somewhere, I believe. Yeah, because the official language cannot tell the story. And that, I think that's part of what the can't be told, it must be told, it can't be told, it must be told, it can only be told by not telling. And the not telling is the unspooling of that language. Yeah.
That it's not innovation for innovation's sake. It's not innovation for the experimental. It's actually for an articulation that exceeds the capacity of the grammatical structures as they are, which are always regulatory.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
give voice to that.
Absolutely.
You know, and that for me was the most profound thing about Zong. That it said, wait a minute, look at what the grammar is doing to you. You know, and it's that break where I'm like, damn. And yet I take the language in me. I take the structures in me. They tell me how to see the world, and they tell me who I am. You know, how do I find my name that is the name outside of these structures? I'm thinking Kuta Kinte. It cost him his foot. You know? Yeah. Okay, sorry. Let's go back to audience questions.
Just, I'm coming with the mic.
Yes. Okay. We have time for 2 more questions. I'm sorry. And then nourbeSe is going to read.
Okay, is this on? Okay. I've read Zong a few times for class and on my own, and hearing it here tonight definitely brought a very distinct and different affective register, so thank you so much for your performance. You mentioned in most, if not all of your performances of Zong, that you wear white, and as I recall from videos I've seen of you performing that, I recall that's true. And you wore cloth tonight, so I wanted to ask, what do you think wearing cloth tonight brought to your performance?
That's a wonderful question. I think it was a sense of trusting my intuition rather than locking myself into, okay, I must wear white no matter what. Because in a sense, I don't know, and it's risk-taking. So I liked what I did tonight. When I say I liked what I did, in the sense I was really nervous about not having the things that I'm familiar with. I usually have a small altar on the ground as well with some shells and so on. It's all a part of trying to reconnect something that was lost and honoring it. And I think each one of these events is a small healing for myself, and I hope for other people. Because it really suggests that we're here now, and we will not be here at some point, but that maybe we can be a little bit more confident that those who come after will also remember. If we can remember, that the possibility of them remembering and continuing what we're doing, you know, really lands with you. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. This one. Good night.
Hi, I'm very grateful being here and listen to you. We are from Brazil, so it's the first time that I see you in person. And I want to ask about the structure of the poem. How do you think about it, the specialization, the relation between the space and the message and the words, because it's very different, because sometimes you decide to part the words in two, and sometimes there are a lot of space between the words. So this is a very intentional, meaningful structure that you construct, and the relation between the structure, the space, the spatialization of the poem, and the saying, when you say in aloud, and because you in the performance you said you make a lot of different sounds, different work with your voice. So I wanted to hear about it. Thank you.
I think the text degrades over time. So by the time we get to the last section, Ferum, well, even the section after that, but it's all you have are these fragments. And it's interesting because when I read that, I didn't read from Ferum today, but just because it was a shorter time, but I can hear another language underneath. One of the problems is, or challenges, it's not a problem. It becomes a challenge when we do the durational readings, because by the time we get to the end, we're really tired. It's several hours, and you're trying to figure out, do I read for meaning? In other words, do I jump the gaps? Or do I read just for sound? And some of the sounds, just even getting your tongue around it makes it difficult. One of the things I've said in the preface is that I think the most important thing happening on the page in Zong are the spaces, not the words. And what those spaces signify, which is the kind of potentiality, and how we fill those spaces or don't fill them. So it's taken me 15 years to really get that. So that's how I would, and when I was writing that section, I really had a sense that for the first time that I had found my own language, which is a language of grunt and growl, and it was, this is mine, you know, and you can get little stories when you read that broken, as if they're the people are talking to themselves about what's happening, and you hear, sometimes you understand, sometimes you don't, sometimes it sounds like gibberish. Yeah. Does that help? Yeah. I think there was...
Hello? So in my writing stories, and the stories that come from beyond myself, it really started for me with surgery and coming back into my body with stories. And so I'm curious about when these stories came to you to be told, what your process of saying yes was. And for me, I also struggled with giving myself permission to tell stories that I'm so used to having been suppressed. I needed to give myself that permission, how you found your permission, and also your experience in returning to the land to ask permission.
Yeah, thank you for that. I said this yesterday. So the stories, when you're being trained as a lawyer, you're reading a lot of cases, and you're reading them through the system as they become precedent. And when I saw the case, Gregson versus Gilbert, I was shocked that it was such a short report for the murder of 150 people. But because I understood how the legal rhetorical system works and the publication and so on, I knew the stories were locked in those, there are 500 different words in the text, yeah. And so I just had to spend a lot of time. It took me a long time to decide to fragment the text. The first section is just the words as they appear, with one exception, in the actual report. It took me about another couple of years because I felt I was cheating because I had set myself this rule, only those words. So it took me a couple of years to do what I call a break and entry of the text. A B&E is how we refer to it in law. So I did a B&E on the text, and I made these dictionaries, and you had the mother word at the left, and then the words that would come to me. So of course, one of the reasons I say, this is why I say Zong is unfinished, because that version of Zong, or the way it is based on my word store. And I studied French and Spanish and Latin in school, so I could find those words, but people can come to it with a whole different word store. It might be interesting to see what they find. In fact, in terms of translation, this has come up because someone has said to me, to translate Zong, you would need to translate the mother document first. I don't know, I'm not a translator, before you could start to translate it, yes? In terms of permission, I actually went to Ghana to seek permission to bring the voices forward. And I shared this yesterday. It was a bit shocking. We did go to as I mentioned, Professor Anyidoho. We spoke to them about what had happened, and I don't know, it was all through translation. So they gave me the blessing. On the way back to London, I suddenly had this thought that I had to ask permission of the Europeans on board that, of their ancestors. And I was like, nah, can't do that. No, not happening. But then I realized, or became aware, that if I wanted to bring these voices forward of the people on that ship, it had to be everybody. So I did go to Liverpool, I bought some whiskey, and I went down to the harbor, and I poured a libation and asked permission to bring those voices forward. Because I think I haven't been there myself, to that other plane where you go when you die, but I suspect that they're not concerned in quite the same way with racism and so on, right? I hope. So, but it was really important on a level of spirit to respect them in that way. So that's how I dealt with that. I think I covered everything in terms of that question. Yeah. I think there was one, this person over here.
Thanks for letting me ask this question. And thank you so much, nourbeSe. I don't know, yeah. Great. Thank you. I've been thinking about a moment in Teju Cole's latest novel, Tremor, where the main character, Tunde, is speaking at a panel at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, where J.M.W. Turner's representation of the Zong massacre is on view. And in the book, while he is speaking, Tunde suddenly loses sight in one of his eyes. And this is culled from an experience that Teju himself often experiences in real life. And for me, that just really drove home the necessity of understanding that this matter is not only psychic, but also physiological, and deeply embedded in our nervous system and the sinews of our body. And so I wanted to ask you what it was like to summon those words and to summon, like, what was the corporeal experience of writing a text like that? And what kind of residue did it leave in your body?
what I didn't finish in terms of the previous question that links to what you're asking, with those dictionaries, what would then happen is the words would just coalesce. It was really fascinating. And I would see the page, and it was like scooping words off the surface. I know it sounds cliched. So the poem was actually written in the margin of those dictionaries. Like each page would, I would look at things and think, oh, okay, those kind of fit together. And so that's one aspect to that. So when it was done, the publisher said it was too long. I had to cut 25% of it. And they weren't offering me any help. I sent it to actually Chris Miller, and I asked Chris's opinion, and she said, no, you can't lose 25% and still have the same book. So that's how I ended up in Ghana, because I thought, well, I don't know what to do. I'm going to go do this course with my friend and ask permission. It was written in a more conventional way. What is fascinating in terms of what you're asking is that when I came back from that visit, I went to a friend's farmhouse to work on it again, and I suddenly had this very counterintuitive idea: spread the words out. Now, you would think that would make it longer, but it actually shortened it. So that's how the form came about. And then every time I would print the first few words, the first few pages of each section, the laser printer would glitch. And the end pages, Ebora, are actually those glitched pages. It only happened when I was printing the first few pages, never happened, but for each section it would happen. So that was really uncanny. Yeah, so I think, once I had that form, spread it out. And then I thought about each word has to go into the space above. So in terms of your question is how, I can't say that I felt that I was dragged down by it. It felt, particularly the last section, I had this moment where I thought, I think I get what Lord is talking about. You can't use the master's tools. Because I felt like this was my own language. Yes, I have this language, even though it doesn't make sense to anyone else. So I think, if anything, it was that kind of propulsive. There was one moment when something was happening in the production, and I had to wait another month for something to happen, and I was so depressed about it. And then I remember I had this thought, oh, nourbeSe, those people have waited close to 300 years for this to come forward. What's another month? And as soon as I thought that, everything just sort of fell into place. So again, this idea of time and then and now and so on, yeah? Mm-hmm. Can I just read this last poem?
Yes, absolutely.
I want to share with you guys. So, Tanya, you were going to ask me about my most recent work. I'm just thinking in terms of time.
Most recent work. Where are you now?
Where are you now? So this poem was written last December. I was in Tobago, and I said to Omar when we met here just briefly that I lost faith for this last year. I've lost faith in things I didn't know I had faith in. No, seriously. I'm not a practicing Christian or anything like that. And I said recently to another friend, my faith is poetry now. That's the closest I can get to it. But this has never happened to me before. I got up one morning in Tobago, first time I'd been back in 4 years since COVID, and I picked up my cell phone and just recorded this poem. If you have it, it's on Facebook. And because of time, it'll be a lot shorter because the silences are very important. It's called The Poets Awoke. The Poets Awoke. The poets awoke one morning. The poets awoke one morning to find. The poets awoke one morning to find that all their words had left them, fleeing into the blackness of night that had no end. The poets awoke one morning and found, as their mothers had warned when they were children, that there were some words too heavy for their tongues to lift, to carry the burden of speech. The poets awoke one morning and found, like birds fleeing a burning field, their words had simply up and flown away. No words to talk about what should not be. The poets awoke one morning and found their words smashed to smithereens, like so many bodies under 2,000-pound bombs. The poets scrambled, scrabbled, here, there, everywhere, under rubble, trying to find a word, a letter, a phrase. The poets awoke to find that words that appeared so inconsequential, the, and, but, this, that, even those had been destroyed. The poets awoke one morning to find that along with that, more portentous words like truth had disappeared. The poets awoke one morning. The poets awoke to find that even lies had gone, scurrying away, so much vermin under bright lights. The poets awoke one morning to find that there was nothing to say. And how could there be poets with nothing to say? The poets awoke one morning thinking of words like carnage and war and brutality and history, like punishment and retribution. The poets awoke one morning to find those important words dead, of no consequence, lying in the gutter. How could they, the poets who awoke that morning, those mornings, do what poets do? And what do poets do? The poets awoke that morning to nothing, to no words. On awaking one morning, that morning in the absence of words, in the absence of silence, the silence that is always absence, the poets turned to each other, then turned to face the world, to ask, who are we without our words, without our silences? How do we witness? On that morning that the poets awoke to find that all their words had fled, in consternation, in shock, in horror, that morning when they awoke to find that all their words had fled like sweat pouring out of their pores, had fled them, forget rats on a sinking ship. They, the poets who awoke that morning, were drowned in the absence of words, their own words, in the absence of silence, in the silence that is absence. Perhaps that morning the poets awoke along with those who are bereft. Perhaps that morning the poets cried. Thank you all very much. Thank you all so much for being such a generous audience.
Thank you, nourbeSe.
From the backup singer.
Thank you so much, nourbeSe. Thank you, Tonya, for your beautiful moderation as well. Thank you all for coming. Stick around if you want your book signed, and we hope to see you soon. Again, have a great evening.